She made one mistake. She showed mercy to the wrong wolf. Now there's a dead man's curse bleeding out in her garden, watching her with eyes too intelligent for an animal, and she does the unthinkable. She doesn't run. She kneels in the mud beside it instead. What happens next will pull an entire pack out of the trees and into her life. This is the story of a woman who buried her grief instead of feeling it, and the cursed alpha who wouldn't let her hide anymore. Stay until the end to see how one act of kindness becomes a war she never asked for. The frost came down like a warning that morning. Emma Conti walked her fence line the way she did every single day since Marco died, checking the wire, checking the gate, checking that nothing on this farm had changed overnight, because change was the one thing she didn't think she could survive twice. Her boots crunched over the hard ground. Her breath came out in little white clouds in front of her face. The sun wasn't even all the way up yet, just a gray smear behind the trees, and the cold had that bite to it that gets into your bones and stays there. She liked it that way, quiet, empty, nobody asking her how she was doing, nobody looking at her with that soft, pitying face people make when they don't know what else to say to a widow. That's when she heard it. A sound low and strange, somewhere between a growl and something closer to crying, coming from the tree line at the edge of her property. Emma stopped dead. Her hand went to her chest without her even telling it to. She told herself to turn around and go back inside. She told herself that twice. The first time, she actually did it. She got 3 steps back toward the house, her boots already turning, her mind already halfway to the kitchen and the kettle and the safe little world she'd built for herself. But then the sound came again, and this time it cracked something in her, because it didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like pain, real pain. The kind that makes a sound come out of you whether you want it to or not. And her feet turned back toward the trees before she'd even decided to let them. She found him behind the old oak tree, the one Marco used to say was older than the house itself. A wolf. But not just any wolf, this thing was massive, bigger than anything that had any business living in these woods, black fur soaked dark with blood, one back leg twisted up tight in a wire snare that had cut clean down to the bone. His sides were heaving in and out, fast and shallow, the way a body breathes when it's running out of time. And his eyes found hers. Amber, glassy with pain, but there was something in them, something that didn't belong in an animal's stare. Emma had looked into the eyes of plenty of scared creatures on this farm over the years. This wasn't that. This felt like being looked at by somebody who knew her. She should have run. Every smart bone in her body told her to run. Instead, she got down on her knees in the mud. "Don't bite me," she whispered, voice shaking so hard the words barely came out right. "I swear to God, don't you dare bite me." The wolf went still, stiller than she thought an animal in that much pain could go, like he understood every word. Emma hadn't let herself feel much of anything in 18 months. Not since she buried Marco in the spring, not since she had to sell off half the herd because she couldn't run this place alone, not since she turned every soft, breakable part of herself into something hard enough to get through one more empty morning in that house. She didn't save things anymore. Saving things meant caring about them. And caring about things meant one day you'd lose them. And she'd already lost the one thing in this world she didn't know how to live without. But this animal was dying in front of her, making a sound like something breaking, and something in her chest cracked right open anyway. Her hands shook as she reached for the wire. The metal was slick, warm blood smearing across her fingers, his blood, then hers too, as the sharp edges bit into her palms while she worked. The wolf's breathing turned ragged and sharp every time she pulled at the wire, every wince of pain rolling through that huge body. But he didn't snap. He didn't thrash. He just lay there and watched her, those amber eyes locked on her face like he was trying to memorize it, like he already had it memorized. "Almost there," she said, not even sure anymore why she was talking to a wolf, not sure why it felt like he was actually listening to her. "Almost there. Stay with me. Please stay with me." The last strand of wire snapped loose with a sound that went straight through her, sharp and final. The wolf let out a noise that wasn't quite a howl, more like every bit of pain in him finally being let go all at once. And for one strange second, just one, Emma could have sworn the shadows around him moved, curling off his fur like smoke lifting away from a fire that had finally been put out. She blinked and it was gone, just a wolf bleeding free. "Go on," she said, and her voice cracked in a way she hated, in a way she hadn't let it crack in a long, long time. "Go home." He held her gaze a moment longer than any wild animal should have, long enough that it didn't feel wild at all. Then he turned, favoring that torn-up leg, and disappeared into the trees, limping but alive. Emma stayed there on her knees in the cold mud, blood drying on her hands, telling herself that was the end of it. A wolf in a trap. A woman with nothing left to lose. Nothing worth remembering. She was wrong about that. She just didn't know it yet. What she couldn't see, what she had no way of seeing, was the man crouched 2 ridges away with a rifle scope pressed to his eye, watching that wolf disappear into the brush with a slow, satisfied smile pulling at his mouth. Salvatore Greco lowered the scope and brought a small radio up to his lips. "She freed him," he said quietly, "just like I knew she would." A pause, then a younger voice crackled back through the static, nervous, uncertain. "And now what?" "Now," Salvatore said, "we wait for the rest of his pack to come thank her. And when they do, we'll know exactly where to find every single one of them all at once." He smiled wider. It was the kind of smile that only belongs to a man who has spent years losing to somebody and has finally found the crack in his armor. Back at the house, with no idea any of this was happening, Emma stood at her kitchen sink and washed the blood off her hands, watching the pink water spiral down the drain. She told herself it didn't mean anything. Just an animal, just one morning, nothing that would follow her home. She had no idea that Wolf had been watching her for far longer than that single sunrise. She had no idea what was waiting out there in those trees beyond her fence. And she had absolutely no idea that 1 week from now, more than a dozen wolves would be standing silent in her front yard at dawn, led by a man who remembered every single second of being an animal at her feet. She thought she had closed the door on needing anybody ever again. The forest was about to prove her wrong. 7 days passed, and Emma told herself she wasn't thinking about the wolf. She told herself that while she fed the chickens, while she fixed the loose board on the porch step, while she lay awake at 2 in the morning staring at the ceiling on Marco's side of the bed, the side she still couldn't bring herself to sleep on. She told herself a lot of things that week. Most of them were lies. The truth was, she kept walking past that oak tree. Every morning, same as always, checking her fence line, and every morning her eyes would drift to the spot in the mud where she'd knelt with blood on her hands. The wire was still there, tangled and rusted, like a scar the ground hadn't healed over yet. She should have pulled it up and thrown it away. She didn't. Some part of her wasn't ready to. On the 7th night, she couldn't sleep at all. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses down on your chest instead of comforting you. She got up around midnight, made herself a cup of tea she didn't really want, and sat at the kitchen table listening to the old clock on the wall tick away minutes she had no plans for. Marco used to tease her about that clock. Said it was louder than it needed to be. She kept it anyway. Some things you keep just because letting go feels like losing the person all over again. She must have drifted off in the chair because the next thing she knew, the sky outside her window had gone the soft gray of almost morning, and there was a sound outside. Not loud, not threatening, just present, like the air itself had changed. Emma's whole body went still before her mind caught up to why. She moved to the window slow, the way you do when some old animal instinct in you says, "Don't make noise, don't make this worse." She pulled the curtain back just an inch. And her heart stopped. There were wolves in her yard. Not one, not two. She counted without meaning to, the way your mind does when it's trying to make sense of something impossible. 6, 8, 11, more than a dozen, all of them standing in a loose half-circle on the frost-covered grass, still as statues, watching her house like they'd been waiting for her to wake up. Her hands started shaking so bad she had to grip the windowsill to steady herself. Every nightmare logic in her screamed run, hide, call someone, but there was nowhere to run to and no one close enough to call who'd get there in time. So she just stood there, frozen, her breath fogging up the glass, watching them. And then she saw him. He stood at the front of the pack, easily the biggest of them all, black fur catching what little light the morning offered. Even from inside the house, even through glass, she knew those eyes. Amber, steady, the same ones that had looked up at her from the mud a week ago like he already knew her name. "Oh God," she whispered, the words fogging the glass. "Oh God, it's you." He didn't move toward the house. None of them did. They just stood there, patient, almost respectful, the way you'd stand at the edge of someone's home if you were waiting to be invited rather than barging in uninvited. It didn't make sense. Wolves didn't do that. Wolves didn't come in packs of more than a dozen and stand quiet in a stranger's yard at sunrise like they were paying respects. Emma's whole body was trembling now, not just her hands. Fear, yeah, plenty of that. But underneath the fear was something else, something she hadn't let herself feel in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Wonder. Plain, simple wonder, the kind a kid feels before the world teaches them to be afraid of everything. She thought about Marco. She didn't know why, except that he always used to say the woods around their farm had more going on in them than people gave credit for. He used to say it with that little smile of his, half joking, half not. She'd always laughed it off. Standing at that window now, watching a wolf with amber eyes stare straight at her like he was waiting for permission to exist in her world, she didn't feel like laughing anymore. She felt like maybe her husband had known, something she hadn't been ready to believe yet. Her hand found the front door handle before she'd fully decided to move. Some part of her, the part that had knelt in the mud a week ago without thinking twice, was already pulling her forward. "This is insane," she muttered to herself, her voice cracking in the empty kitchen. "This is insane, Emma. Don't you dare open that door." She opened the door anyway. The cold hit her first, sharp and biting, the kind of cold that wakes every nerve in your body up at once. She stepped out onto the porch in her socks, not even thinking about boots, not thinking about anything except the pull in her chest telling her this mattered. This was real, and if she shut the door and went back to bed, she would spend the rest of her life wondering what would have happened if she'd just been brave enough to walk outside. The wolves didn't flinch when she appeared. They didn't growl, didn't bare a single tooth. They just watched her, calm and steady, like her stepping outside was exactly what they'd been waiting for. The big one, the one with the amber eyes, took one slow step forward. Just one. Then he lowered his head toward her, not in threat, but in something that looked an awful lot like a bow. Emma's eyes filled up with tears she didn't see coming. "You came back," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "You actually came back." The wolf's eyes never left hers. And for one long, frozen moment, standing barefoot on her porch in the frost with a dozen wolves watching her like, she was something worth honoring. Emma Conti felt something she hadn't felt since the day she buried her husband. She felt seen. Behind the tree line, far enough back that no one in that yard could have spotted him, Salvador Greco watched through his scope with his jaw clenched tight. He'd been right. The pack had come, every last one of them gathered out in the open like fools, exactly where he needed them to be. He lowered the scope just enough to speak into his radio, voice flat and cold. "They're all there, every one of them out in the open." He paused, watching the woman on the porch, watching the way the big alpha bowed his head to her like she mattered. Something twisted behind his eyes, something that looked almost like jealousy, though he'd never have called it that. "Get the others ready," he said quietly. "We move at the next full dark." Out on the porch, Emma had no idea any of that was happening. She only knew the cold biting at her bare feet, the steady thump of her own heart, and the wolf in front of her who had somehow, impossibly, turned her quiet. Broken little world into something that felt like it was just beginning again. She reached out one shaking hand toward him. And the wolf didn't pull away. Her hand touched fur for the first time, and the world did something strange. It didn't shimmer or explode or do any of the things she might have imagined if anyone had ever told her this could happen. It just shifted, quiet and certain, like a held breath finally letting go. The wolf's body changed under her palm. Fur gave way to skin, bone reshaping itself with a low groan that sounded more like relief than pain, and where the massive black wolf had been kneeling a second before, there was now a man. Tall, dark-haired, Down on one knee in her frosted grass with her hand still resting against his shoulder like neither of them wanted to be the one to break the touch. Emma stumbled back so fast she nearly fell off the porch step. What are you?" "My name is Dante," he said, and his voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in longer than a week. "Dante Morty. And you, Emma Conti, just did something nobody else has managed in 3 years." She gripped the porch railing, her heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her throat. "How do you know my name?" "Because I've watched this farm a long time," he said quietly. "Longer than you'd believe, long before that snare, long before any of this." His eyes, still that same amber, held her steady even kneeling there bare in the cold. "A curse was put on me, on all of us. I was trapped as a wolf, and the only way to break it was for somebody to free me without knowing what I was, and without wanting anything back. You didn't even hesitate. You just got down in the mud and you saved me." Behind him, the rest of the pack stood watching, silent and still, like they were giving this moment room to breathe. Emma's eyes flicked over them, then back to Dante, her mind spinning so fast she could barely keep her feet under her. "I don't understand any of this," she whispered. "I know," Dante said, "but I need you to understand it fast because the man who set that trap, he didn't do it by accident. He did it because of you, because of this land." He stood, slow, careful, like he didn't want to startle her. "Your husband's property line runs straight into the last piece of territory my pack hasn't claimed. Salvator's been hunting for a way to draw me out for years. He used you as bait, Emma. He knew I'd come if you got hurt saving me, and he knew my whole pack would come to thank you. He wanted us gathered out in the open, together, easy to hit all at once." The words hit her like cold water down the back of her neck. "He's coming here." "Tonight," Dante said, "full dark." As if the woods themselves had heard him say it, a sound cracked through the trees, sharp, deliberate, a gunshot that sent every wolf in that yard snapping into a defensive crouch at once. Emma screamed and dropped to the porch floor on instinct, and Dante was in front of her in half a heartbeat, his body between her and the tree line, already shifting back, fur rolling up his arms as he turned to face the dark. Men came out from the trees, maybe 8 of them, rifles raised, moving fast and organized like they'd planned this for a long time. At the front, calm and smiling in a way that made Emma's stomach turn, was a man she'd never seen before in her life. Salvator Greco. "Well now," Salvator called out, his voice carrying easy across the yard like he had all the time in the world. "Look how easy that was. The widow opens her door and the whole pack just walks right into my hands." "Get inside, Emma," Dante growled, half his face still caught between man and wolf, eyes blazing amber. "Now." "No." The word came out of her before she even decided to say it, and she was shocked to hear how steady it sounded, considering her hands were shaking so hard she could barely feel her own fingers. "This is my land. My husband's land. I'm not hiding in my own house while you all get torn apart out here because of me." Dante's pack moved fast, fanning out, snarling, putting their bodies between the rifles and the porch. Gunfire cracked through the morning air, wild and panicked, and Emma watched in horror as one of the younger wolves went down hard near the fence line, crying out in a way that was somehow both animal and human at once. "Dante," she screamed. He turned, just for a second, just long enough to see her face, and something in his eyes told her he was about to do something reckless, something that might get him killed protecting a piece of ground, and a woman he'd only really known for 7 days. That's when Emma saw it. Off to the side, half hidden in the chaos, one of Dante's own wolves wasn't fighting Salvator's men at all. He was slipping backward, away from the fighting, toward the trees, moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with retreat and everything to do with getting out of the way before something happened. Their eyes met for one split second. Guilt, plain and ugly, written all over that wolf's face before he vanished into the dark. There was a traitor in Dante's own pack, and there wasn't time to do a single thing about it right now. "Dante, watch your left." Emma's voice cracked across the yard, raw and desperate, and Dante spun just in time to take down the man circling in from the side instead of catching a bullet meant for his back. Salvator's smile finally cracked. He hadn't planned on the woman fighting back. He hadn't planned on her voice cutting through the chaos like that, sharp and sure, calling out warnings like she'd been part of this pack her whole life instead of 7 days. "Enough!" Emma screamed, and something in her voice made every single creature in that yard, human and wolf both, go still for one heartbeat. She stood at the top of her porch steps, shaking, terrified, and more alive than she'd felt in 18 long months. "This is my land. My husband died loving this place, and I will not let it become a graveyard for your war." Salvator's jaw tightened. For a moment, just a moment, something like doubt flickered behind his eyes. Then he raised his rifle one more time, aimed not at Dante, but straight at Emma. Dante moved faster than anything Emma had ever seen, a blur of black fur and fury, crashing into Salvator before the shot ever left the barrel. They went down together hard into the frozen grass, and the rest of Salvator's men, watching their leader pinned and bleeding under the full weight of an alpha they could never hope to beat, broke and ran for the trees. Silence dropped over the yard like a blanket. Dante stood slowly over Salvator, chest heaving, eyes still wild with the fight. For one terrible second, Emma thought he might finish it right there. Then he looked back at her, standing on her porch steps with tears streaming down her face and her whole body trembling, and something in him eased. He let Salvator go. The man scrambled up and bolted into the dark without looking back, swearing this wasn't over. The threats fatting into the trees until there was nothing left but the sound of Emma's own ragged breathing and the soft whine of the wounded wolf by the fence. Dante shifted back to a man right there in the frost, walked up the porch steps slow, and stopped right in front of her. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the relief, something else too, something warm that hadn't been there a week ago in the mud. "You didn't run," he said quietly. "I'm done running," Emma whispered, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I spent 18 months hiding from everything that could hurt me. I'm tired of it." Dante reached out, slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His hand found hers, warm despite the cold morning air, fingers lacing through hers like they'd done it 100 times before. "There's still a traitor in my pack," he said. "And Salvator won't stop, not really, not after tonight." "I know," Emma said, and for the first time in a long time, the fear in her chest didn't feel like the kind that made her want to hide. It felt like the kind that made her want to stay and fight for something worth keeping. "But whatever's coming, I'm not facing it alone in that house anymore, and neither are you." Behind them, the rest of the pack gathered close, quiet, watchful, healing wolf and bleeding men slowly becoming something that looked a whole lot like family. The sun came up fully over the tree line, gold light spilling across the frost, across the blood in the grass, across the woman who'd once knelt in the mud to save a stranger and never once asked what it might cost her. Emma Conti had spent a year and a half building walls around her heart, so high she thought nothing could ever climb over them again. Standing there on her porch, hand in hand with a man who used to be a wolf, surrounded by a pack that had chosen her right back, she finally understood something her husband always used to say. The wildest things in this world aren't always the ones to be afraid of. Sometimes they're the ones that save you right back.